Good afternoon, I'm Andy Hodges, live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to the Mint Special. Our discussion this afternoon, the state of the economy. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Now, as usual, should you have any views or comments on our program this afternoon, please feel free to contact us via our Facebook page, Zimpaper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. The Zimbabwean economy appears to be on a rebound, especially following the good rainfall patterns witnessed across the country. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, has recently reviewed its economic growth projection to 6% from the 3.1% it had projected in April. The April projection was a downgrade from the 4.3% it initially predicted back in October 2020. The projected economic growth is on the back of a bumper agricultural output, increased energy production, and the resumption of greater manufacturing and construction activities. Official inflation numbers have shown a significant slowdown. The annual inflation rate declined from 362.63% in January 2021 to 106.64% in June 2021, while the monthly inflation rate decelerated from 5.43% in January 2021 to 3.88% in June. Although I must add that the June number was a 1.34% month-on-month increase from the May rate of 2.54%. Now, according to the Treasury Quarterly Bulletin, January to March 2021, issued from the Zimbabwe's Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, the government recorded a fiscal or budget surplus of 9.8 billion Zimbabwe dollars during the first quarter of 2021. The first quarter Business and Economic Intelligence Report 2021 by the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, CZI, has shown that industry, together with the general economy, is on an upward trend. Projections and outlook are mainly positive, based on expectations that stability will be sustained and inflation will continue downwards. This is evidenced by the first quarter capacity utilization of 47% and 56% projected for the second quarter. But are things as rosy as they seem? To discuss this and review the state of the Zimbabwean economy during the first half of 2021, I'm joined in the studio by Sekai Kubarika. She's Chief Executive Officer at the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, CZI. Peter Mutasa, President of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, ZCTU, and Professor Gift Mugano, an economist. Welcome to the Mint Special.
Thank you.
Now, in our first segment, I get my guest views on the state of the economy, employment, wages, the auction system, and the exchange rate. Gift, briefly, your overall comments, please. Your overall thoughts on the state of the economy during the first half of the year. In your opinion, is the Zimbabwean economy headed in the right direction?
I think so. From the indicators which you've spoken about, it's looking good, no doubt about that. Clearly, our major challenge last 2 years or so has been inflation. And
inflation and money supply, I would say.
I mean, the result was inflation. So basically, when you have it getting down to around 106%, which, remember in our last discussion, where our projection that it should be below 100% by July this year. So I think we're on track. And these are the indicators. Yeah, but of course the health, the well-being of the economy, when it matters to the people, I'm sure that's what they're going to discuss as we go ahead.
But I mean, still 10% by your end. I mean, that's the projection, correct?
I think 20% is too ambitious, in my view. I think something around 30% annual inflation by end of year is within reach. 10% would be a miracle.
Because we're on 106%.
And also because of policy inconsistency and some kind of policy missteps. I know we're going to talk about SI 127, but those are upsets which can upset the system as we go ahead in fighting inflation.
Sekai, I mean, your organization, of course, represents business. You have heard some of the statistics I quoted in my opening from your own first quarter Business and Economic Intelligence Report 2021. From a business perspective, what are your overall thoughts on the state of the economy during the first half of the year? Again, let me ask you the same as I asked Gift. Is the economy headed, in your opinion, in the right direction?
Thank you, Andy. I would say the economy is generally headed in the right direction. But I would like to qualify that and say, even if we look at the results that we have from industry for the first quarter, from our analysis, you would see that capacity utilization, which is averaging 47%, is still below 50%. And really, it's still below 100%, which it should be. So we are celebrating that on the basis that we are heading northwards from where we were over the past 10 years. But having said that, you also want to take note of the fact that in terms of performance in the sectors, you're looking at between 32, it's all the way from 32% in some sectors, all the way up to 85%. So there are different pockets of different experiences of this positive direction that you're talking about. And this translates as well into the reality of a lot of people in the economy. So there are pockets of different things happening, and things are happening at different paces. Of course, the numbers do tell a story that we are headed in the right direction.
But
it's a game of averages.
I did a quick look at some of the profits being declared by some of the businesses, particularly for the first half of the year or the end of 2020. The numbers are not bad. I mean, some of them are hitting record profits. I mean, that's a good indicator that business at least is profitable in certain sectors, as you said.
Exactly. That's so there are sectors that are doing pretty well. Like I'm telling you that there are people that are at 85% capacity utilization. But there are also sectors that are not very much in a very good space.
And construction is suffering a lot, isn't it?
Construction is in a very good, is performing very well.
Okay.
But there are other sectors that are like at 32%. And if you're operating at 32%, that's really not a very good thing.
It's almost close to a
exactly.
Degree, yeah.
So
Peter,
it's a varied story.
Right.
Yeah.
But at least you think that there is some essence of we're no longer on life support, so to speak.
The collective story, yes. So the collective picture, yes, we are headed in the right direction.
Okay.
But we shouldn't then forget that inside that collective story, there are still pockets of
issues that we need to deal with.
Yes.
Peter, you've heard both Sekai and Gift's comments and opinions on the state of the Zimbabwean economy during the first half of 2020. It appears that most economic indicators are positive, yet one number that appears not to be moving at all is employment or employment creation. In fact, reports indicate that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, more and more citizens are migrating into the informal sector. Formal employment has even reduced or at the very least remained stagnant, and a lot of people have lost their jobs because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I have a two-part question for you, Peter. First, of course, your thoughts on the state of the economy for the first half of the year. And also, as ZCTU, your comments on the state of employment in Zimbabwe. How, in your opinion, have workers across the country been affected by the economic situation?
Yeah, so apart from the figures that you have already stated, there are other figures, and as a matter of principle, we need not to be overly concentrated on this monetarist policy view, where we look at targeting inflation, where we look at targeting capacity utilization or economic growth per se, GDP. The economy must be serving the people. The economy has to be serving the people. So if you look at the Zimbabwe report, 83% of people in urban areas failing to buy food stuff, bread, meat, cooking oil. If you look at the recent World Bank report, 40% now in extreme poverty, from around 34-35%. The statistics are everywhere. 23%, as indicated by the cabinet report just recently, of students have dropped out of school due to economic challenges. So these are the real statistics that we need to focus on. We need to look at the quality of life, those positive economic reports, statistics that are given and thrown around have impacted on the people. If you look at the issue of the cost of living, CCZ, Consumer Council of Zimbabwe, the basket now over 40, close to 41,000. The poverty bottom line now close to 30,000. And how much are workers earning in the sector? The minimum wage still remains 2,549. And in domestic workers, they're still at 900 RTGS.
So hang on, 30% poverty data, around 40,000 cost of living for a family of 6.
Yes.
Average salary 4,500, domestic workers 900 Zimbabwe dollars.
Yes, and that shows how people are living in misery. So we need to take a different approach, and in our view, we need to focus on human development and not just be taken away by these statistics. People are in misery.
I will be getting to that cost of living adjustment later on in the program, Peter. Thank you. Gift, one interesting statistic, and we speak about this a lot, is the level of informality in the economy. It remains very high, including high levels of informal employment. I mean, figures indicate, we've done a few statistics, 60% of economic business is being transacted in the informal sector in Zimbabwe. Now, as we all know, the informal sector doesn't really play any role in terms of tax collection and so forth in the formal sector, which is one of the reasons why I think there's a bit of a skewedness between formal and informal businesses. Your brief comment. Can we and how can we address this informality that now has become a regular part of our economy?
So the starting point is to have investments, domestic investments, creating an environment for business to invest back into processes. Because some of the people in the informal sector are graduates. They are not trained to go and sell airtime. So you cannot go and formalize what is not unformalized. So you need to start by having a real job creation, real enterprise development. Then the traditional informal sector, like the selling of newspapers, remain, ice cream.
But to achieve that, you need to have a robust economy to create the capacity to create jobs.
Correct. So that's why I'm saying government must create an enabling environment for business to work. Look at what we have gone through from 1998. We had chaotic policies from 1998 to date. Just look at how many statutory instruments do we have from 1 October 2018 to date. I've lost count, over 100. So how do you run an economy? How do you attract? How do you even encourage domestic investment? You can't. Just half the year 2020 going backwards, the companies were facing serious erosion of capital because of inflation. And what was causing that? It was government policy. So how do you expect the same companies to create jobs?
But I mean, they are very good SMEs, which we can term informal, but they are real businesses. They're just not registered. They're not part of the
so
business database.
That happens when you have stability. They have to separate themselves. Those who have to stay in the informal sectors, which need formalization, and those who have to go back to the jobs, right? And even the value chains, which can then be developed. You know, if you look at the Japanese Toyota motor vehicle industry, the Toyota motor vehicle becomes like a mountain, and the SMEs becomes like the ants around the mountain. Are you with me? So where is our mountain in Zimbabwe? The mountains are collapsing. and it's very difficult then to deal with the issue of formalization if you don't have mountains or game changers in a particular sector. So it's a kind of a causal relationship. You need to have a working enterprise in the formal sector to take away. Because if you have Toyota set up, they have to formalize because they need documentation to supply Toyota, is in this case. So how do they formalize? You can't go and say formalize for them to pay taxes. You know, that's not the business of.
And people have not been paying taxes for so many years.
Why should they pay taxes?
Why should they pay
if they are not
getting
value out of it? Paying tax should just happen automatically when they're getting value out of the business.
I suppose that begs the question, if these informal sector players pay taxes, it would boost revenue and, of course, allow money for the government to spend.
But that's not how it works. If you go
it's not how it works, but at least it would boost government coffers if we could find, as you said, the enabling environment to get them into the formal sector. So, Kai, I want to stick to employment. And your numbers that you talked about, 32% in some sectors, even as low as 23%, if I not recall, last year sometime, 47% first quarter, 56% second quarter. But it appears that we're not seeing capacity growth in terms of new jobs created, particularly by the formal sector, or old jobs brought back, rather, because some old jobs, of course, have been let go. I'll talk later about the 500,000 households where at least one person has lost their job. In the business sector, as in general, how is employment creation, job creation? How is it at the moment, or in the first half of the year?
So in the first half of in the first quarter, rather, in our own survey, we did find that the jobs created represented 13% of current establishment of the companies that we surveyed. So they had 13% of their current establishments as new jobs. But as long as you're operating at less than 50%, your capacity to generate new jobs is limited. So if companies were able to increase their capacity utilization, then that would actually cause them to at least fill the jobs that are actually supposed to be filled for them to optimally utilize their current installed capacity, even before you talk about any other expansion projects. But, there are a few projects that are going on in terms of expansion in industry, which we also did notice in the first quarter from the survey that we did, which I believe also came with some of the new jobs that were created. But obviously, we are not creating as many jobs as we should. And that can only happen when everything is running at full
the government
capacity.
did put an ambitious target. I think it's what, 2 million jobs in the next 5 years, I think from 2018. So that's an interesting statistic. And we do have to create employment, but of course everything needs to tie in and knit in effectively. Sakai, before I move across to Peter, your organization, in fact business in general, has expressed some concerns in terms of delay in settlements of bids at the foreign exchange auction. And the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe in February 2020, and I quote the governor of the RBZ, Dr. John Manguchka, he said, "The bank has managed to resolve the glitches and payment backlogs experienced last year by some banks' customers in the settlement of funds from the auction. The bank has agreed with banks to ensure that foreign currency allotments are settled within 14 days from the date of auction." Reports indicate that this is not the fact. In case it's not the fact now, in fact, it's much longer than that. In fact, I hear 3, 4, 5 weeks sometimes in some cases. Furthermore, some observers and critics have accused the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe of manipulating the exchange rate on the auction system, which has remained stable at around 85 Zimbabwe dollars to $1 US over the last 6 months or so. Your comments and thoughts on the foreign exchange auction system and how its effectiveness you believe can be enhanced?
I don't really like to talk about the auction because the auction is a means to an end, and I seem to think that we are missing the bigger picture, because the bigger picture is currency reforms, and this auction system was introduced as a step towards us moving towards currency reforms, as it were. So I think at this point we should be evaluating 1 year on into the auction. How much have we moved towards reforming the currency situation in the country, resolving the currency situation in the country, which is the foreign exchange management has been with us for so many years, and are we closer to resolving this perennial question? But I would like to address a little bit of what you have said about the auction being manipulated and the delays. I think all those sentiments are a result of maybe some shortcomings of the auction, where the laws of supply and demand are actually no longer holding, because if the auction is auctioning money today, money which then gets paid after a long period, then that's the distortion that then.
But it also makes sense that if a number of companies bid for the auction and they only get maybe 30 or 40% of the allocated amount that they want, that would put pressure on the exchange rate to move. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, I've been trading in the foreign currency market for many years in banks, and that's a simple thing. Supply and demand really drives a price, but it appears the price is remaining stable at 85 to 1, and it's just not moving.
Yes, so I'll stay away from manipulation. I'll stay on supply and demand. So what you are seeing is that I think we have a distorted supply and demand situation, and that is what is causing what you are seeing right now. That we are assuming that we've got this supply, yet the supply is actually not met in real time, as it were.
Gift, I'm going to come to you about SI 127, but before I do that, Peter, the continued use of the US dollar in Zimbabwe as a medium of exchange, and what critics allege, there's a thriving parallel market out there, and in fact it's got worse since SI 127. It appears to put considerable pressure on wages and salaries for workers. In fact, as you said it earlier, 40,680 Zimbabwe dollars is the cost of living amount for a family of 6. That's the latest number we have. It appears to indicate that wages and salaries, you pointed this out again, have not been keeping pace with inflation, and workers are struggling to make ends meet. We have seen inflation numbers coming down, and yet the cost of living continues to rise. And I mean, we're sitting here as, I suppose, economists. We understand the correlation between prices and inflation. But Zimbabweans, of course, hearing all this good news, they anticipate prices should come down. They anticipate their wages should go up. But the fact is that, Peter, in fact, wages are not keeping pace with inflation. They haven't for many years. Your comment.
Yeah, so what we are witnessing is what the UNDP in 1996 said will happen to every economy that is fixated on targeting inflation, targeting GDP growth, and forget about the humans that are supposed to be saved by that economy. So the Reserve Bank, the UNDP said that economy we can have economic growth, but that is ruthless. an economy that serves a few. You have been talking about corporates that have been declaring. I've seen 5 billion from in the banks. I've seen 1 billion in other sectors. If you go to construction that you were talking about, you can see mansions that are in the northern suburbs and a lot of construction work that is happening. But then if you go to where the people are really staying, you see the misery there. You see how people are suffering, failing to buy food, failing to pay school fees. So we have an economy that we think we are clearly in a vicious cycle. And the major challenge that we have that must be addressed is low incomes. The working people are not getting value. The SIs that we're talking about, SI 185, allowed corporates, allowed businesses to peg prices in US dollar. Government is getting its taxes in US dollars. Local authorities, they're getting their user fees and their taxes in US dollars, but the salaries are remaining pegged in RTGS. So that mismatch where we now have two economies within one, in fact 3 if we talk about the informal economy, but the same economic agents who are supposed to shop in one shop. Some are getting US dollars as rents and profits. The rest, who are the majority, are getting RTGS. So if you look at some sectors, people are earning 10,000 RTGS. It's not even sufficient for bus fare. Zupco has increased the fares by 100%, but salaries are not moving. So we are...
Electricity has gone up, of course.
Electricity has gone up, fuel has gone up, school fees has gone up. SI 127 that you are going to talk about has caused all prices to increase, but salaries have remained stagnant. So we have got a social time bomb, and even not just social but economic. Like I've said, we are in a vicious cycle. If we don't deal with the income, the low incomes, we are not going to get savings. We are not going to get capital formulation. We are sinking, and the problem is that people are not seeing that we are in a deep hole and they are continuing digging. Yeah.
Let me turn to one of my guests who has no problem talking about the auction system, and of course that's Professor Gift Mugano. Gift, the recent introduction in Zimbabwe of SI 127 of 2021, mainly aimed at abusive tendencies being employed by companies in the auction system, or by some businesses, let me hesitate to add. The subsequent naming, shaming, and potentially fining of at least 18 companies who the Reserve Bank says allegedly has abused the auction system, including, I must add, a listed entity. The continued arbitrage that's there in the auction system, the general acceptance of US dollars still as a medium of exchange in the country at parallel market rates, as much as SI 127 has been brought out. They are still trading in the parallel market rates, particularly in the informal sector, and $1.5 billion US dollars being released into the market via the auction system. These appear all to be signs that the auction system needs to be improved. And what is your opinion about that? And also briefly your opinion about this manipulation, or the perceived manipulation of the exchange rate by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe?
Right, I will be very radical about the issue of manipulation. First and foremost, if I'm just looking at the numbers as an economist, I would question how the auction system will be market-led. Because if you want to have a market-led auction system, you must have enough reserves in this foreign currency in the central bank to support the auction system, right? So if you look at the numbers which we are seeing in the public domain, we are below 1 month import cover, right? So to me, I don't want to be a rocket scientist or to be a prophet to say they are manipulating or not, because if they were not manipulating, the rate will be going up every day. How can you have a rate which is stagnant since it began? So clearly someone is doing some magic behind the scenes, right? Number one. Number two, because of the fact that we don't have enough foreign currency in the central bank, naturally, even if you're a governor, you will be forced to manipulate it, because you know if you let it go,
it will just go.
It won't stop.
Yeah.
So
we've seen it before, haven't we? We've seen it in 2008.
Yeah. So that one is not a debatable issue as far as I'm concerned. It's being manipulated. It's only that some of us want to be diplomatic about it. So it's manipulated. The issue now of the SI, I want to deal with it from 2 angles. The first one is that, is it a good SI? I think I would take the SI 127 as kind of compound D fertilizer analogy, where when you are growing maize, you must have compound D.
Okay.
But now you are applying the compound D when the maize is tasseling. That's what they are doing. At the time in June when they were introducing the auction system, it was supposed to come as a one package to say, we are introducing this system, and these are supporting illegal instruments to allow the system to work. But when you come a year later and now begin to use this SI, you are telling the market that things you are failing to control the system. And now you want to find another legal instrument, and it creates pandemonium in the market, which Peter is talking about, as high prices. You've seen the dollar prices going up to match the official rate. So it's creating more confusion. But the market is resisting it. Why? Because government is not in a habit of going into negotiation and having consensus with the business and everyone when they're getting into policy making. So I think the lessons which are being driven here is that whenever we are doing any policy, let's build consensus so that we are able to implement it together. Because government does not implement the policy.
I'll quote a good friend of mine, Eddie Cross. He said, if it ain't broke, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In our next segment, we continue talking about inflation, the impact of COVID-19 on Zimbabwean economy, diaspora remittances, and the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCA. You're watching the Min Special. Our discussion this afternoon, the state of the economy. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpapers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Sakai, the announcement yesterday by the government of Zimbabwe of a 2-week immediate level 4 lockdown in the face of the third wave, or they call it the Delta, of the coronavirus, appears, I think, to be welcomed by most citizens. I think it's a serious Delta. So please be safe, everybody out there, and get vaccinated. I think that must be our message here from ZTN. Unlike previous lockdowns, though, it allows the economy and business to continue operating. What, in your opinion, though, has been the impact of COVID-19 on business, especially during the first half of 2021? And are you concerned that this new third wave may actually push back some of industry's efforts to resuscitate?
Yeah, definitely. I concur that the lockdown is a welcome measure because there's no other way. But I think that the major setback that we will have, which will have an impact on business, is the way in which the lockdown is implemented. Because it has to be customized so that specific value chains are not disrupted unnecessarily. You know, the hours, yes, they say 8 to 3, but that might not work for certain work establishments.
Because some work during the night, don't they?
Exactly.
Business. Yeah,
and you know, dairy cows don't stop giving you milk because it's 3 p.m. and they still have to be milked at the end of the day at 6 o'clock, and that milk still needs to be delivered for processing. So I think the specific measures addressing the peculiarities in each of the value chains or in each of the sectors is what we find missing. And the delay between the announcement of the lockdown and maybe, you know, the issuing or the addressing of some of those specific needs is really what disrupts business. So we do expect that, yes, there will be an impact. As in previous lockdowns, you know, the impact of the lockdowns was very clear. There was reduced demand. Shops were opening for shorter periods of time. So we were not able to move as many. And
also that affects capacity production, doesn't it? Because you have to reduce production because there's less demand from the shops or from your buyers.
Yes, but I think what is not in the public domain is the fact that a lot of businesses already have made a lot of adjustments without the announcement of lockdown. We have already decongested workplaces. In quite a number of workplaces, people are less than 50% in the workplaces. People are having a blended work arrangement where they have different teams coming to the offices at different times. We have already been promoting vaccination. You know, private sector, we committed to procure 1 million vaccines, 1 million shots of vaccines, and we have started accessing that through government. We are providing transport for employees. There's a lot of risk consideration that companies have done at enterprise level and in the different populations and communities
to
that
protect
their
yourselves
employees
against the third
exactly
wave
that their employees come from. So what these announcements are blind to are some of those existing measures, you know. So because we need to be able to say these are the measures that we have taken at enterprise level, and how can those be considered in the crafting of the lockdown measures and the implementation of those measures.
It's unfortunate, when we talk about the state of the Zimbabwean economy, we could talk for hours because there's so much we could cover, unfortunately, and we've only got about 10 or 15 minutes left. Peter, I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question. The importance of the tripartite negotiating forum. I mean, I hear your message. You're talking about the economy maybe having good numbers, but it's the people who are suffering, and we're looking at what the welfare of the people are. So there's 2 points. The TNF and its importance in terms of achieving greater impact and effectiveness, especially in maintaining the rebound in the economy. And the second one, which is, I suppose, critical as well, is that COVID-19 has highlighted the fragile state of Zimbabwe's social protection programs. And as you said, poverty in Zimbabwe is on the rise. I think it's around 7 million people apparently are in that's report state, are in poverty at the moment. So the TNF is the first question. And how do we translate economic growth into tangible welfare benefits for our citizens?
Yeah, so the straightforward answer is that TNF is dead. And if you are to look for the murderer, it's government, the politicians. They destroyed TNF. There's nothing to talk about TNF.
I just want to jump in and say the views expressed on this show are not those of ZTN.
There is indeed, these are views of ZCTU and Peter Mtasa, so we can stand with that. There is no political will to sit down around the table in this country and discuss our issues. We don't know where this comes from, but there is a big desire for those in power to dictate, and this is why the many SIs, I think at some point, a crisis in Zimbabwe counted about 600 SIs, and everything is just compulsion. But economic agents, they take positions to protect themselves and to cover themselves, and this is why we are sinking deeper. So we disagreed at TNF, the last TNF, on the basis that last year in February 2020, the ZCTU gave a position paper on currency reforms, and both government and business agreed that they needed 6 months to either stabilize the economy, and if they failed, then we move on currency reforms. Our preference was the adoption of the South African rands for a number of economic issues.
Okay, which is for another discussion, I'm sure, yes.
So we then came to July. The government reneged and they refused to deal with currency reforms. Then we differed on the salaries. Our view is that if we are to maintain the current status quo, then workers must be remunerated in US dollars, and we must be taken back to where we were in October 2018. So that a teacher was earning 520 and who is now earning $100 is not incapacitated.
But Peter, I understand that wish, but it's pretty hard to achieve, isn't it?
No, it's not.
You think that we can pay back at 2018 salaries, everyone getting paid $500
Yes, if we stop all our
doable?
borders, the porousness in our borders, where someone can waltz into Robert Mugabe International Airport with 6 kgs of gold, unaccounted. If you look at the amount of gold, the reduction at the Fidelity there from last
they
year,
say 100
last
million
2
US
years,
a month.
100 million US dollars is not mean money.
Month, yeah.
If we then you count about chrome, workers pack chrome in trucks going to China there. We know how we are losing in terms of transparency in that regard. So this economy is rich. We shouldn't be poor, we shouldn't be begging, but we are losing. It has got so many leakages, and those leakages are benefiting private citizens, the elites and their cronies, and the burden should not be on workers.
I want to now move on to social protection, because obviously the COVID-19, which of course no one expected, it was a shock, to be frank. It did highlight some of the social protection weaknesses in our system.
So we are doing what Einstein said, insanity. We are not learning. This is the third wave. So we didn't learn anything in the first wave. We didn't learn anything in the second wave. We are getting into the third wave, and if my recollection is correct, just last week, the Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare announced that they're stopping social transfers, cash transfers, and social welfare. So when the government is supposed to be protecting incomes and jobs, What are they doing? They are going to the biggest employer, which is the informal economy, raise down all the workplaces, raise down all the marketplaces, destroy the little that is taking care of this economy, destroying the little that is giving protection and safety to the majority of the people in this country. Where we are facing lockdown, the government is not addressing the teachers' salaries, doctors' salaries. I don't know how we get discouraged that someone wants to be treated by a doctor who is not earning anything, who is even failing to buy food, and you have peace of mind that they've come out from theater and everything was okay. So we don't have anything to talk about social protection. The government has just abandoned the citizens. People are on their own. And the little that they are doing to protect themselves, because user fees in hospitals, you have to do it out of pocket. We don't have anything in. I think
there's a national health.
Yeah. So we are just being protected by the diaspora. Without someone from the diaspora, if you fall ill, you are gone.
Right. Gift. You know, one good number, I suppose, that's coming through is the significant improvement in diaspora remittances. I believe the number for 2020 was around 1.2 billion, if not higher than that, US dollars. However, foreign direct investment inflows over the last 6 months into the country are generally very poor and subdued. Why is this, in your opinion? And what must be done to improve the investment climate or investment inflows into Zimbabwe?
Thank you very much. So I think this is a challenge which we had from 2000 to date. Our foreign direct investment is 1.1% of gross domestic product for the last 21 years. But in 1995, 1996, we had 25% of GDP, foreign direct investment, 25% of GDP. So to answer the question, what was happening in 1996? There was good governance, there was order, no political instability, investments.
But someone argues that's what we have right now.
Yeah. Now we have political instability. You hear people who are being arrested for political reasons. Those who are corrupt, they are fashionable, they work scot-free. So investors don't come to that kind of a place.
But don't you think the government is taking some steps to try and rectify that opinion?
You look at the ranking of World Bank ranking, we are 140 out of 180, 190. So if it is a report card of your child coming from school, would you kill a cock for that kind of a kid, or take a whip? Right. So that's where we are. Corruption index, we are 173 out of 178. Right. This is what is the investors look at outside there. Right. Freedom index, again, we are low ranked. There's no freedom. When I talk of freedom index, it's about how the market is open for business. We are not open for business. So investors don't even come and talk to us. They look at the numbers and they make a decision. And that's the pity. We can defend it here, but when those numbers are out, global competitiveness reported by World Economic Forum, 124 out of 138. We aren't competitive. Yeah, so that's the whole package of the report card for Zimbabwe.
I do have just a few more questions before we close. We're running out of time, unfortunately. But Sakai, briefly as well, you know, African Continental Free Trade Area is coming in. In fact, from the 1st of January, it was set up, agreement started, duty-free trading of goods and services across borders is now technically underway. As local businesses, what have you done, particularly in the first half of the year from January, in terms of preparing yourself for Africa or even taking advantage of it?
Thank you, Andy. Sorry, I'll first address one issue that I don't think you gave me an opportunity to answer about the currency auction. The auction was set up as a price discovery mechanism, so we should not make it a destination. Because when we make it a destination, we begin to sit there and say, is it working? Is it not working well? Is it being manipulated? But that's not the end goal. It was put up as a price discovery mechanism so that we progress towards a unified exchange rate market, where we don't have multiple exchange rates that have different margins, and we begin to have some convergence between the official exchange rates and the exchange rate that takes place in the trading.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to have to, because we've got about 5 minutes left. So
okay, so then I'll go to the CFTA that you're talking about, and that's the reason why I brought up this issue, because when we are looking at the CFTA, we have to be on a solid industrialization path as a country in order to take full advantage of the CFTA. If we do not resolve the currency question, we are always going to be around that issue, because we need to resolve the currency question once and for all, so that we can now have the level of stability that allows us to have some long-term investments in upgrading our industries.
But I mean, if while we're doing that, other countries are moving. I mean, South Africa's already put a list of zero-rated products through the Parliament of South Africa. We are still discussing it, talking about it. I think East Africa's already started training on the Africa. Rwanda's already in there. So the more that we pontificate, I suppose, the more we're going to be left behind.
Exactly, and I think it's pontification on the issue of we need to take a radical approach in addressing the currency question. We also need to take a radical approach in terms of competitiveness, in terms of ease of doing business in this country.
All right, you're watching the Min Special, our discussion, of course, the state of the Zimbabwean economy. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpapers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. Now, I do have one final question for you. Unfortunately, I can only give you 1 minute each to answer it. Let me start with you, Sakai. Economic fine-tuning and institutional reforms. We're expecting the 2021 midterm budget review. You know, what are your expectations? What do you think is the way forward in terms of maintaining at least some semblance of growth, some semblance of recovery in our economy?
For us, the one big ask is stability. That's what we are asking for.
That's what you want, stability.
Stability.
And that will allow business
Fiscal
to thrive.
and monetary policy alignment and ensure we have stability. That's
Peter?
the basis on which we can build.
Thank you. Peter, your views, what are your expectations? Well, you know, I mean, you painted, we're painting a very sort of semi-rosy picture of the economy and the numbers. You, of course, are saying that if you look at the citizens of Zimbabwe, they're suffering and they're not really getting what they should be getting in view of the wealth of our economy. So what are you expecting going forward?
So we are definitely an ailing economy, ailing people, ailing governance. In fact, we are a failing economy, if not a failed state itself, in all measurements. So what we need is to address all the factors holistically. We need to address our politics. We need to address our economics. We need to address our social. But fundamentally, we need fairness in the economy. We need fair distribution of the economic gains. We need fairness in terms of distribution of wages, rents, and incomes. We also need to take care of those who are vulnerable. And unfortunately, the majority of the citizens are vulnerable, so we need serious social protection. The 9.8 billion that the Minister of Finance is talking about, we need to feel it, we need to see it, we need to see it in our homes, we need it to pay the exam fees for kids who are sitting for ZIMSEC, for example. People do not have that money. We need to see it in the hospitals, buying equipment, buying drugs. So we need serious governance reforms, and this must be anchored in social dialogue. Zimbabweans are not talking to each other. Those in power in ivory towers, they are very disconnected with the citizens. They can't even listen to labor, even labor leaders. So who are they listening to? So we need a paradigm shift in terms of governance, in terms of our social policies, and in terms of the economy. Everything's not working well.
Okay, give the final word. Your opinion, how can the Zimbabwean government ensure sustained and inclusive economic growth going forward?
For me, I think we need to go back to the drawing board, but from a budget point of view, we want a working budget. I have knowledge about how the budget is working and the payment mechanisms. There are delayed payments. They pay after inflation has hit the money. Look at those outside the country, in our embassies. They have 9-month arrears, are being kicked out of the houses. The records are there. But we have a surplus. Where is the surplus? We have no drugs.
Is it a real surplus?
It's not a real surplus. It's a dummy. You avoid paying to make a surplus. So we have a serious wage compression. And I think the budget must work. Because remember, government is communicating with the people in all areas. So if you say a surplus, what does the teacher say? They don't believe it. What does people who are in the embassy say? They don't believe it because they are staying in the streets. So let us now go to the drawing board. We understand we are coming out of austerity, but let us now move out of austerity. For Minister of Finance, this is his message. Let him pay his dues, the payments on time. His game is delaying the payments to capitalize on inflation, then he makes a surplus. It doesn't work in economic development. Thank you.
Oh, on that note, we have come to the end of our program this afternoon, or this evening now. You've been watching the Mint Special, our discussion, the state of Zimbabwe's economy. The broadcast was brought to you by Zimbabwe's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Ledriz. I'd like to thank my guest today. That's Sakai Kubarika. She's Chief Executive Officer of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, CZI. Peter Mutasa, President of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, ZCTU, and Professor Gift Mugano, who's an economist. Thank you very much for appearing on the program today.
Thank you, Andy.
A final comment. Overall challenges still remain within Zimbabwe's economy. Let me make that clear. According to the World Bank, the pandemic and its impacts disrupted livelihoods, especially in urban areas, and added 1.3 million Zimbabweans to the extreme poor. Surveys conducted in 2020 indicate that nearly 500,000 Zimbabwean households have at least one member who has lost his or her job. Wage earners in urban areas are also disproportionately affected by the pandemic, as their pay was cut or no pay was received at all. No one can say that Zimbabwe has not made economic progress. The numbers bear out the fact that, in fact, Zimbabwe has. But what is also clear is that hard work must continue. Jobs must be created. The informal sector should and must become more formal. Wages and incomes, some would say, need to be adjusted sooner rather than later. Support must be given to business to increase production and enhance competitiveness. Zimbabwe, frankly, needs to make more, export more, and buy more of its own locally produced products and services. More must be spent on social services, health, education, and vital infrastructure. Importantly, the Zimbabwean government must contain its fiscal spending, stamp out corruption, and remain within its budget. Basically, only spend on what is budgeted for. Zimbabwe's economy is fragile and needs to be carefully nurtured. Otherwise, things could turn around in an instant for the worse. And no one really wants that. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, have a good night, and you all be safe.